just accomplished so much in your career as a writer across so many different fields. So, of course, we're going to go into the exciting reason that we're here, Báite, which is
very exciting.
I got to watch that, and it's so gorgeous, and it's such a. I think even though it treads in a dark territory, it's very warm.
Yeah, I think so. It's beautiful as well, which is nothing to do with me and the writing. It was to do with the editing and the grading and all of those other things. It's really like, even if the story wasn't for you, I think people will enjoy it. Just the visual side of it. It's beautiful. Makes not that you'd have to try too hard to make Connemara look beautiful, but it definitely does it.
Oh, but the story of it is obviously, there's no film without a script. there's no like without our characters, without the drama, there's nothing. So obviously that's your fabulous work. But before we get into cover that, I really want to talk about you as a writer and your experience, even because you've just accomplished so much across like writing books, award-winning plays that have traveled everywhere, and TV and film as well. When did you know you were a storyteller?
I would say probably like most Irish people, I was always a bit of a storyteller. I was never one of these people who was a writer or writing from when they were young, though. In school I was like, I just did English because I had to do English. I didn't particularly love it. I used to love writing poetry, but it was mostly kind of comic poetry and mostly about my siblings, which was just more to annoy them than anything else. But looking back, I did enjoy doing that. But I was not a writer, not even that big of a reader, to be honest, until I have two boys, and when the younger boy was quite young, I just knew I needed to get out of the house one night a week. It was at that stage where like you two small children and the walls are closing in a little bit. So I had gone, when I went to college, I actually studied engineering. So I was working as a waste management engineer.
Wow.
Which is slightly less glamorous profession. But that's what I did originally out of college. And then, as I say, I just decided I needed to do something to get out of the house. And I happened on a creative writing course. I often think I could have done a painting course and now we wouldn't be sitting here, because that was really what set me off on my journey. I did a creative writing course in Dunleary Technical College, I think it was called at the time, whatever. It was literally a one night a week, 2 hours of creative writing with Helen Bovard Ryan, she's a poet. Yeah. And honestly, I think probably the first half an hour into that class, I was going, oh crap, this is what I was supposed to do my whole life. I shouldn't have done engineering at all. I want to do this forever. And it was literally that much of a discovery.
Would you have considered yourself an observer though? Like, what would have been the sort of skill set that you had that when you started to do it, it was that flow?
Yeah, I guess so. And maybe even looking back at the comic poetry I used to write when I was small, that was all observational for sure. And I do like to, I listened to an interview with somebody recently and they said that actually was that really cool Olympian, and she was saying she spends a lot of time in her head, and I think I spend a lot of time in my head too, in like I like to analyze stuff, and maybe that's sort of that engineering side of my brain that is a bit like that. But I never felt I was kind of an artistic person per se. I used to sing a lot, like I sing in choirs, and I enjoyed performing like with a group. I would never really wanted to be an actress or anything like that. Like I was never sort of like into performing, and still amn't on my own on a stage. But as part of a group, I always enjoyed that as well. But really, it was just I can't describe it any better than it was literally like a switch being flipped, and I had never really thought I should write or be a writer, and I just enjoyed it so much, and I still do.
And
like
other people do.
It's
enjoy your writing and your
stories.
Well,
that's just really great to hear. But I mean, it's 20 years ago now I started writing, and honestly say, like, there isn't a day since that I haven't, if I'm not writing, that I wasn't wishing I was writing. And I've had lots of different jobs in my career before that, and whereas I would have enjoyed aspects of them, I never loved anything as much as I love doing this. And it's funny because you hear of people who kind of talk about, oh, I'll never retire, but I kind of go, oh God, I couldn't stop doing this. Like, why would I ever stop writing, even if it's not being published or being made into a play or a film or whatever? I know I'll never stop writing, because I think I just wouldn't want to go on. You know what I mean? It is a funny way, I suppose, to come. I don't know have many other people just found writing that late in life, like in their 30s, that weren't already maybe, you know, in school at least good at writing essays or stuff, you know. But that was my journey.
Well, I'm also going to say, if you're an observer, and by the time you hit your 30s, you do have something to say. You've seen and experienced enough of life, and I'm speaking generally. I don't know
for sure.
the ins and outs, but the pain of like that things can throw at you, and that gives you a lot of insight into.
I absolutely believe that. And it's funny, I wouldn't have known that people went to college, and maybe it was more so in the States than in Ireland, but to study screenwriting, for example, and then that they'd leave college and write films, because it feels to me like you can't do this job without having some life experience, because I'm not sure what you're writing if you're not writing. It's like this well you need to draw from, and there's no way around it. You have to be older to have that well to draw from. So I absolutely think that being an old, like, the older you are, almost the better writer you could be. And I see that as well. Like I write a lot of my own stuff, obviously, but I've also been lucky enough to be asked to work on other people's things and maybe help improve scripts or whatever. And I really believe that, you know, there's fantastic writers, and there's people who are so naturally good at writing, of course there are, but the quality of story, I think, improves with age, a bit like wine and cheese, which are also great things.
Oh, and tell me then as well what your journey was like in those beginning. Like, when are you finding your voice, or did you hit the ground running?
No, not at all. I really, ironically, in that class, as I said, Helen Bovard Ryan is a poet, so she wasn't ever teaching screenwriting or playwriting even. It was prose. So we were like, the class was literally, it had such an impact on me. The first hour of every 2 hours, she kind of tried to teach us something, some part of the craft that is teachable, which was also a complete surprise to me. I didn't realize you could learn how to write, you know, books and scripts and stuff. But of course you can. It's like being taught, if you think about it, like, you know, fantastic painters that we know and enjoy their work. Most of them went to art college to figure out the difference between, like, physical watercolor paint and oils, you know, and how to apply them and stuff. There's a craft that you have to learn. So, but it was a surprise to me that was also the case with writing. But those classes, she would teach us something, and then the second half of the class was always, you had to submit some work in the days prior, and everybody would get a chance to comment on everyone else's work. And that was such a great training ground for me now, even when I maybe work on other people's scripts or just editing my own scripts. It really helped with that, helped with that skill of learning how to give notes, how to receive notes, what's a good note, you know, what's an absolutely pointless note that isn't helping at all, you know, all of those things. So but out of that class, as I say, she wasn't focused on script writing at all, but I did write a couple of articles. I started my first novel actually in that class, but I also wrote some articles and had kind of the confidence, maybe following the feedback I was getting in the class, to write a couple of articles. And I mean, I'm quite a confident person, maybe to a fault. So I thought, like, I read my articles and thought, you know, these are good. People should read these. So I submitted them to a few places, but the Irish Independent broadsheet newspaper was one, and the Irish Times actually as well, and they liked the articles, so they got published. So they were sort of like commentary pieces, like they were kind of maybe about what was going on in the world at the time, but through my eyes and through my lens, and with a slight comic kind of a tone to them. And so
so your voice was always there.
Yeah, I guess so, because they're the first pieces of work that I ever had published, that I was ever paid for. And yeah, they were I suppose like I'd like to think sort of intelligent pieces, but with a comic kind of tone to them. And now that now that I'm saying that out loud, that's what I like to write. That's what I write. Whether it's contemporary or period drama, it is, I hope, something with a bit of a something that makes people think and has an interesting angle. But there's almost always a comic twist or a comic tone. But that's where my writing career, as it were, started. So from the class, I started the novel in the class and then went on to get that published.
Wow. And so you've again worked across so many different forms. Which came first then in terms of creative writing?
Yeah, 100% I was writing prose. So whether it was the shorter kind of articles that were getting published, or I had started, or I suppose I'd written a novel, but that didn't get published. And then I wrote another novel, even though the first one didn't get published. I don't know why I thought, here, I'll write another one, because novel writing's really hard. I find it really hard. But interestingly, I started a script in that class in Dunleary, and no one else was submitting scripts. But I just kind of had this idea for a TV show. And so I wrote what I thought was a script, like in a Word document. You know what I mean? I was like completely clueless. But it was funny because I getting feedback for it was great fun, because people were sort of going, oh, this is something different, like let's read it, whatever. But it wasn't really the forum to be writing scripts in that class. But it just it kind of shows me, I suppose, in hindsight, that that's always what was going on in my head. That's kind of what I wanted to do. And certainly I loved the dialogue side of writing novels. Like, I was always much more into getting the dialogue really good and strong and interesting. And then, again, that's kind of indicating really maybe it's scripts I should have been writing all along, kind of, yeah.
But I suppose it's the scripts as well are like, you do have to go into that more visual way of storytelling. But if it's the dialogue specifically that you're hearing, that's your character's voice. And if that's the thing that's coming through most strongly, do you think maybe it's the playwriting that is your default mode and that everything else is a translation?
I wouldn't say everything else is a translation. I definitely feel like, obviously we're here because of Báite, and Báite was started off as my novel, The Lake, Asperla, and then I actually wrote it as a stage play, which I was fortunate enough to get some funding from, just a small amount of funding from the local authority, so I was able to pay actors to do rehearsed reading. We were able to get a director and spend a full day doing a rehearsed reading in front of an audience, which was such an amazing opportunity, and just shows how important those small little grants are that the likes of Dunleary, Rathdown and other county councils, arts offices put forward. And they don't think they're doing anything major, changing anyone's life, but actually maybe they are. They're great little stepping stones. So I had written the book Asperla, I'd written the play which was based on the book Asperla, and then and I suppose, to your question being like, is my sort of default playwriting? Possibly, but I do think that certain projects belong on stage. Certain stories, the way you want to tell them, they belong in a novel, and then others maybe belong on screen, and then some of them belong on TV and some of them belong as film. And I do think it's absolutely, obviously possible to transform one to the other, but they all take on their own shape. And I think some stories just work better in one way than the other. But I do, it's a long-winded way of going, I do love playwriting. And I suppose if you put a gun to my head and said I could only write one type of, like choose basically screenwriting, playwriting, or novel writing, I probably would choose playwriting.
Yeah. And is that a little bit though? Because as the writer, you do get to control more of it as a play? Like, is it more so, like, I mean, the novel, you 100% get to control it, and what comes out the other end is just your words.
Yeah.
But with the theatre, it's the format and how the text is treated, that it is 100% or mostly still yours at the end.
Yeah. To a point, yes, because and it's not a control thing, because if I was a control freak, I think I'd write novels, and I absolutely will never. I always say this, and then I'll go, maybe I will, but I won't. I'll never write another novel, because I found the process so solitary. And once I realized that you could write stuff and then a team of people would come on board and like help you make it better and cooler and for an audience, like that was like, what? This is the best thing ever. But yes, I think you're correct. I think part of the reason I love playwriting is because you do, as a writer, have more control over what gets to the audience at the end of the day. That's not to say, though, that like having a team of people who are experts in their field, like directors and production designers and makeup artists and like the costume people and the light, all like the DOPs, like it's so cool to have people who know what they're doing.
I do understand that, but the visual elements make up such a big part of it that if you're like, that it's sort of someone else's vision and job, that it isn't your...
Yeah, 100%. And whereas, as I was saying, it's so wonderful to work with people who, and honestly, I've, like, as I said, I've had other careers, I've been in other workplaces, a lot of different workplaces, and I've never been somewhere like on a set where everybody wants to be there. Like that's quite unusual, and I don't know if people in the industry actually understand how unusual that is. But to go to work every day where like 98% of the people you're going to work with are just gagging to get going and like loving what they're doing and so giving it all, as opposed to just like clocking in and clocking out. It's phenomenal. It's so amazing.
But there's such an ecosystem, and in what other industry would somebody who was like, kind of like the equivalent of like a kind of top tier executive, volunteer to do a reception job, which is the equivalent of someone who's working on series like Game of Thrones, come back and do a graduate's short film when the script is good, but they will do that. And you'll have DOPs going, this is not my usual rate, I'm doing all this work, but I'm doing this because I love the story. Like, I'm happy to take that step down and support a beginner filmmaker because I love that craft. But you just like, what other industry would be like, I'm going to take like a 300% pay cut when I could be getting, like shit tons of cash for reality TV because I just really care about it.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. And like I, as I often say, I kind of helicoptered into, like parachuted in rather, to this industry from a whole other life. So I kind of feel like I can see it clearer maybe than people who went, wanted to be filmmakers all their lives and went to film college and all that, like whatever. It's really such a joy. Like, it is fantastic. But the thing I would say about playwriting as well is, and especially now, I think about this more and more. Yes, there's great control for the writer, although, you still have a director and you still have a producer who they'll always have strong opinions. But for sure, you have more involvement and more control. Just the uncertainty about production for lots of reasons, for like financially, but also in terms of like AI and what's being made and how it's being made. I'm hanging on sort of very much to the playwriting as I see it as something that will be more and more important. Whereas it's so funny when like we had this massive TV boom with streamers, say, in the last 10 years, and honestly I'm sure like half the word we're going, theatre's dead. Like, who's going to go out to like a theater anymore to see a play when you can see like anything you want to, blah de blah, on the TV, like, you literally have such choice. But I'm finding myself now how I'm kind of, you're second guessing some of the stuff you're watching on telly, and you're kind of going, I wonder how they actually pull that off. It looks a little bit like whatever. And I think that'll just, until we figure this whole thing out, that's going to be a bigger and a bigger issue. So I personally feel, and I see it amongst my friends, and I just believe it's a thing that people are going to turn back to theatre and to going out for the experience of seeing a live show and seeing real bodies, warm bodies on a stage, speaking lines and bringing a story to life.
But there's a magic in it. Like there's an energy, an electricity, and like a power where you're in someone's physical performance and they're embodying something with such truthfulness that, like, as amazing as sitting even in a packed audience and sharing that experience, and there is something sort of beautiful about that too, but when it's the performer giving and you're receiving, like, there's a little bit of magic there. It's
incredible. I mean, from the writer's point of view, the way I always think, like, I could write a novel. I've written novels, and I don't know if, like, I know somebody, I could watch them go into a bookshop and buy a novel, bring it home, but I'm not like sitting beside them in bed looking over their shoulder, like, to see, are they enjoying it? Are they laughing at the bits they're supposed to be laughing at? So you just don't have any of that experience at all. And with film, it's like amazing to sit in the cinema in an audience and listen to them laugh at the lines that you wanted them to laugh at, but kind of what to expect every time. It's sort of, there's no kind of spark of magic, as you say, that there is with like sitting in a theatre in an audience where your play is being performed and you're feeling the energy. And that's not like, I'm not being sort of like, woo, but there is such a feeling of an energy. And as an example, one of my plays, Cosima, was on just after Christmas. Mary Murray stars as the bowed Cosima Wagner, who was like a piece of work and was such a great inspiration for a play. But so she, Mary Murray has been touring the play, but there were 2 nights just recently after Christmas in the Pavilion Theatre in Dunleary. And I was going to go to one of them, but I had no business going to both. But I just, as it happened, ended up going to both nights. And I thought the first night went so well. I was just so buzzing with the vibe in the audience, with how they were receiving Mary, like with the laughter and like literally the gasps and the standing ovation she got. I was going, like, if I died tomorrow, I'd have, like, that was a good run. I really enjoyed that. But I ended up going to the next night, and it was like, again, it was amazing, but it was completely different. And the audience kind of laughed at different things. They sort of got excited at different parts. They didn't get as excited as certain parts as the night before. And like, I'm sitting there going, there's no difference. It's the same play. It's the same actor. It's just, there's a vibe. And so that doesn't, you don't really get that when you're sort of sitting in a cinema audience as much, even though it's amazing to be there. Yeah. But there is just a buzz you get from sitting in a play, in a theatre audience when your play is on stage, that is just, it's unbeatable.
Yes. And now you have, kind of like done so well in each of those fields, and, like written longer form projects, and you have a feature film with Grinder attached that looks like it's going to be incredible. In terms of your slate, in terms of the projects that you're developing, in terms of the things that are starting to come to fruition, do you have all these stories that you're, picking from in any moment? Or is it like, is there a strategy to it, or is it more organic?
Honestly, I suppose it's, and I'm sure this happens, it's sort of like a kind of a, there's times when you're writing a lot and you're just writing a lot because you have to get it out of your head and onto the page. And then there's times, I suppose, like now, where you're maybe, going around a lot, touring around a lot with work that's out there already and trying to promote it. And then there's times where you're trying to sell a script that you have already written. And I think the the ideal scenario for me, and I'm sure for everybody, is to have a bit of a balance of all of that. Yep. As it is now, I have literally four feature film scripts in pre-production. Like they're all attached, all optioned. Yeah. Some have they all have directors attached, some have talent attached. They're all at that stage though where they're kind of being being cast or early stages of financing. So of course there's every chance that not one of the four of them will see the light of day, but yet
the stats are like 1 in 8 or something in terms of things.
So
that
I
go
need
into
4
development.
more. But these are, so I like, you know, there's been, I suppose, years, maybe like after I had written the novel and the novel was published, I was writing a lot of screenplays, and it's now that they're kind of at that stage. So and I've had a TV series optioned recently, and again, like that's amazing, and hopefully a network is going to come on board, and then it'll be like full scale ahead in terms of script writing and development of the series, and hopefully a second series. But so it's not like that you can sort of plan those things. I feel like, you know, I try to, as I always say to my poor parents who are kind of going, so what are you doing now? And I'm going, well, I've this and this, and they're like going, you know, could you get us a spreadsheet, because it's really hard to follow all the stuff going on. But as I say to them, like, I just have to keep throwing loads of spaghetti at the wall, and that's what we all do, I think, in this game, and hope that some of it sticks, because, you know, and ironically, stuff that I you know, and this is the same, I'm sure, for every writer. I had a general meeting with a producer 18 months ago, and was just chatting about different projects, one of which they sort of said, oh, in a follow-up email, we really liked that. We actually talked about it to our superiors, but we're not really looking for a straight comedy right now, so, you know, whatever. Cut to 18 months later, someone, an actor is attached to it who had just read it and really liked it, and now the producer is back on board. And so, you know, I thought maybe that project was never going to see the light of day 18 months ago, and now it's optioned and there's talent attached, and it's being, you know, talked about at network level. So you just don't know. You just have to keep, I mean, you know this, you've heard this a million times, how people say, like, successful writers are no different to unsuccessful writers, they're just more tenacious. And honestly, I feel that's the truth.
And in terms of, you know, like, it is nice to know this, that you've come through this, but were there any sort of dark nights of the soul at any point where, you know, like, there was like a project that you were like, oh, it's almost there, and then it's gone for whatever reason, or where you're like, oh yeah, this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one example of that is Cosima. So I had originally started researching Cosima Wagner. I had heard about her years ago, because I used to do music classes, like you know, half the countryside were made go and do piano lessons and whatever, and I'd heard of her as Franz Liszt's daughter, and she married Richard Wagner, you know, so she was kind of an interesting character, end of. And she'd always stuck in my head, and I think I saw a documentary about Wagner and they mentioned her again. I was going, there's something about her, there's definitely more than meets the eye. So I started researching her 10 years ago now, nearly 11 years, 12 years ago now, thinking I would write a book. At the time, I remember I was reading Curtis Sittenfeld books, and they were sort of like, you know, dramatizations of real women, you know, sort of semi-true novels about, like, Hillary Clinton. Well, it wasn't maybe Hillary Clinton was one of them. Barbara Bush was one of them. You know, she'd written some really cool books about women, and I thought, I'll write something like that. I'll research the hell out of her, and then I'll write my version of her story in a novel. Yeah. But the more I researched it, the more I realized, oh, this needs to be a film. This is just too good. Like, there's so many things she did that are just would blow up a cinema screen. Like, they're just phenomenal. So I ended up writing it, instead of as a novel, I ended up writing it as a screenplay, and it got optioned, which I almost wasn't surprised at, because I just knew the story. It was just so, like, her story was so good, and I loved writing it, and so I was delighted it got optioned. And then this was in 2020, and the producer, who was, like, so nice, and I'm still working with him on other projects, but he was like trying to attach a director, but partly because of COVID, partly because it's a very specific world that she lived in, and it was a period drama, etc., etc. He found it difficult to attach a director, so he gave me the rights back. And it was all very amicable, but it was, of course, so disappointing. I knew it was the right thing to do. He knew, and I knew he wasn't the right person maybe at the time, but it was heartbreaking because I was going, I know how good this story is. But I suppose your question was like, were there dark nights of the soul? That was a dark night of the soul, but what my reaction to it was, well, sod it, I'm going to write a play.
That's a good
It was
response,
what I
yeah.
did. So because I've said this before, I felt like Cosima Wagner, rightly or wrongly, was on my shoulder going, try harder. I want my story told, because she is a bit of a witch. So that's when the one-woman play version of the story happened. And
that has toured like extensively.
yeah,
and that
it's
has
been
really
great.
made-
Like it's hopefully going to, go farther, and we'll see. Like it's wonderful, and finding Mary Murray to play the role has just been like such a blessing, and she's the best ambassador for the play ever, because she loves the play herself and has said, like, if she didn't have to do anything else except Cosima for the rest of her life, she'd be happy, which is like a wow thing to say. But my point being that, like, there's no point, I suppose. Dark Night of the Soul, yes, but like you can either just give up, and I could have just shelved that script and done nothing with it, and I understand why people might do that, but I suppose I didn't. I wrote the play to get myself out of that dark night of the soul place. The play did well, or is doing well, and I've now got, as a result of the noise that the play is making, a couple of really interesting meetings about the screenplay. So, it comes back to the tenacity thing, and I do feel for people who maybe, don't have the same level. Everyone's different, and some people are more egotistical than others. I mean, I think, why shouldn't I get the play on, and why shouldn't I know this is a great movie script? Why, I know somebody, it's just going to take me more time. That's okay. But I'm going to keep at it because it's, so, that's how I suppose I work through those moments though,
And tell me as well, where did the lake come from then? Where did, the kind of origin of that pop into your mind?
Yeah, well, so my dad is a civil engineer, and then I did engineering and ended up working in waste management. But I've always had a bit of it's just part of me, always interested in engineering and engineering projects, whatever. And the Blessington Lakes are like obviously quite near to where I live in Dublin. And I remember being told how they used to, I don't know if they do it anymore, but they used to bring tourists out in glass bottom boats so that they could see the drowned village that's at the bottom of the lake, because the Blessington Lakes are a man-made lake that was the result of a dam being built, the Pullafuka Dam, to generate electricity for Dublin. So this valley was flooded, and the village that was at the bottom of the valley was flooded, and all the businesses and farms and mills and all of the other things there all flooded, and the people had to get out. They were called the washed outs, which is, you kind of, certain things stick in your mind. It was going like, that's really dark, that they're called the washed outs. But those people were financially compensated by the government, but it was always the case that they were never really properly compensated. So it was a really dark story, and but the whole sort of, I was interested in it sort of from an engineering point of view, just how they did it, how they built the dam and they flooded the lake. But then I started reading about the people who were there and how had to get out, and it was just such a fascinating story. And then I started researching these lakes are all around the world. Like Lake Mead in America here is the same. Like they're all around the world. There's one in Italy where when the water level drops in drought times, you see the top of the steeple of a church pokes out because it's still there at the bottom. So this kind of, it's a universal story. And of course I started thinking, this is a great story it's a great premise to sort of set a story in. And then I was sort of thinking about the time itself and how, if you were there and you had to get out. But then I was thinking about, what about the next generation? So the children of those people, the children of the washed outs. What was their story like? Because yourself, it's like being a child of maybe somebody who went to war and they come back and they've got this darkness and they don't like talking about it and all that sort of stuff. It was a bit like that. I thought there's got to be an impact on the next generation. So that was kind of where I found my story. I wanted to write about a strong woman, young woman character. And the 1970s were great for that because the women's lib thing was kicking off. And so in Ireland, obviously, it was like quite the time to be, you know, a women's libber. Because obviously the church was still had such a strong hold over everything.
The marriage ban and everything.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, when you think of how far behind we were.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Europe,
but I mean, you know, and obviously like the fact that, you know, you couldn't be gay. It was illegal to be gay. So if you were gay, you weren't allowed to talk about it. So, like, I mean, that's just one thing, you know. It was such a different time. And yet, I know, because I just know there were women who were, you know, swimming against the tide, who were doing their own thing. And so I wanted to write a story about one of those. And that's where the Peggy character, the main character in the lake and in Báite, was born. And so it was sort of those two things coming together that gave me the premise and the idea for the novel, The Lake. And then so I wrote that, and it got published by HarperCollins, which was fantastic. You know, quite quietly. It wasn't a big bestseller or anything, but it was lovely to have that, to have a physical copy of my book, to see it in bookshops. That was, you know, a nice experience.
And in terms then of adapting it, of writing the screenplay, what was the process then? Because I presume if this is a story you know so intimately, and there's so much that just simply cannot be conveyed or put into a film, and I will always have like a lot, like people go, oh, it doesn't have the book, it's, you know, it's not the same as the book, and I was like, but it can't ever be the same as a book, because books are not the same as films.
No.
They tell stories and look at things completely differently, and it's like it is hard. Do you, when you are so close to that source material, how do you go about adapting it, and like where did that opportunity come?
Well, as I said to you, I had written it first. Well, I wrote it first as the novel, and then I found it really interesting. There was a couple of I used to love Goodreads. There's a website called Goodreads. I'm never on it anymore. Yeah, but I loved it because every time you read a book, you could see what other people thought about it, or you could leave your own review or whatever.
Is it scary having a book on Goodreads?
Oh God,
it's like having things on Letterboxd.
Yeah, but you're
just
like, it's out there. It's like, you know, there's reviews on Amazon and everything else. Yeah, but you know, it was fine. As I say, it wasn't such a massive bestseller that it was causing ructions in the review world or anything. So I was safe enough. It was mostly people who liked, you know, to read an Irish story or whatever. And yeah, like there's always going to be people who have bad things to say about things. But then there's loads of nice things people say too. And it was what a couple of comments noted how they felt it read so like a play. They were sort of, which is, you know, surprise, surprise, they were sort of, it was very visual and they could see it, you know, which maybe is a bit of a flag. I should have gone, oh, maybe that's what I should be doing. Yeah. But that's what led me to think myself. I was going, actually, you know what, it would be a great play. And I had written another play at that stage, and I had it produced, but it was quite on a small scale, but it had gone really well. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to write this as a play, just see what happens. And then I suppose then I didn't have it produced, because very quickly I thought, you know, this would be a great 3-part TV series, because sort of like an after the news on RT1 9 o'clock, you know, sort of Sunday evening thing, because the story very naturally falls over the weekend, so it's like broken into Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I could really see it working as a TV 3-parter limited series. So that was what I pitched originally to Danu Media, who I'd met at Fish in Galway, and I had seen Siobhan Goira, who's the producer of the film, speaking at a couple of Screen Ireland things, and I was just really impressed with her, and still am. I mean, she's phenomenally competent, but she's just also a really genuinely nice person, and you know, you don't always get both of those things together. So I just really liked the idea of her, and I suggested the lake an adaptation of The Lake as a TV series.
And at this stage, was it in Irish?
No, not at all.
Oh, interesting. Because like Danu as well, they're based.
Yeah. I knew they were doing Irish language stuff. Obviously, they produce Rust and Roon. But I suppose must have mentioned maybe in some of her talks that they also work on English language stuff, and they've like been involved in a couple of other big projects and smaller projects and whatever. So, and they were looking for ideas. They were looking at the time for TV shows. So that was why I, as I say, it was really a personality thing. I just thought I really like her. I like the idea of her. I'd like to see what she says, and I felt like she'd give me good feedback even if it wasn't for her. And as it happened, then we got chatting because we had a lot in common, because my mother is from Connemara, so we kind of knew a lot of the same people once we got talking. And she suggested then that maybe we pitch the idea as a Sine Cahir film as opposed to a TV series, and she was going, you've Irish, so why not? And I went, okay. And that's how it happened.
And is there a development element to that scheme as well? When you go in, I know that like a few projects go in and get developed to a certain point.
That's right.
And only a few get across the line.
Yeah. So in our time, which I assume it's fairly similar still, because it was 2020, we submitted, we pitched it as a Sine Cahir film. And at that stage, I can't remember exactly what you had to put in, but it wasn't a script. It was an outline, I think maybe character bios, that sort of thing. So there was a lot of work involved, but I obviously knew the story very well. And at that stage, I didn't have to really know how the script was going to be. We just knew the story because it was going to be the same story as the novel. So it was quite, not easy, but it wasn't a huge amount of work to pitch the idea. And then TG Cahir rather choose a shortlist, which I think was 5 projects, that they give a small, relatively small amount of money to, with a view to getting a script written. You're allocated a script editor, and at that stage, I think it was Dervla Regan, because she was involved with Screen Ireland. And after later on, we had Aideen McCarthy. These people were just, you asked me about the adaptation. The script editors, I was so blessed to have the ones I did have, because I know sometimes script editors are amazing, and I'm sure they always try to be amazing, but sometimes they bring a lot to a project, and sometimes they just don't. But both in this case really did. So we had to submit the script at that stage, which I think was maybe 6 months later. And then out of the 5 shortlisted, then we got selected as the winner or whatever, which meant that we were funded as a Sine Cahir film to go forward and make the film.
And I suppose it's done, when you watch the film, very concisely in terms of the production design, because, were there ever elements of, this is a period piece, this is going to make it harder? I mean, it has to be set in that era for the premise to work, because of the attitudes have changed so much. So were there, sacrifices or changes that had to happen to fit the budget?
Yes and no, because to be fair, as you say, we had always known it was going to be set in on this particular Football Ireland weekend of September 1975, and there was never really a question of changing it, because, as you say, the story is even in terms of when all those valleys were flooded, there was loads of it done sort of 15 years after the Second World War finished, for just purely engineering reasons. There was concrete available again, and there was steel available again. There was literally physical reasons why those projects, a lot of them happened in the 50s, and I very much wanted the story, as I said to you, belonged to the next generation, which brought you to the 70s. So there was never a question about changing that. There was a kind of question about how we would deal with the flashbacks which were happening, what the story that happened in the 1950s. So the story of the washed outs and the Peggy Peggy's parents, the Casey's parents, who are dead in the 70s, but obviously were very much alive in the 50s, and when they had to move, or when all their neighbours and community had to move.
Because in terms of percentage, I think she plays, like a very key point in representing somebody, like the 70s, the times are slightly changing, but back then, holy crap, were things so conservative.
Yeah.
In terms of, like, did you have to make that smaller to fit the different structure, or was that?
It was interesting. So the book doesn't actually have any flashbacks in it. So the book, this is back to your point of how you can't compare when you're adapting. You can't just adapt something like, chapter by chapter. This is the next beat. This is the next beat. It never works like that. It just can't. So it was really a case of, like, there's literally in the book. The book is sort of almost like a two-hander between Peggy Casey, the main character in the movie, and the cop who's sent from Dublin to figure out what's going on. So the outsider coming in. And the book is very much those two people's story and how they sort of end up intertwining or not. The movie is much more Peggy's story. The book literally had one flashback scene right at the end. The movie has 3 very significant flashback scenes that are dotted through the story. So it comes back again to your point about how you adapt a novel to a play or to a screenplay. It's really a case of, like, breaking down the whole story again to it's literally like a jigsaw puzzle, taking it all apart and looking like, not jigsaw puzzle is a bad analogy. I always say, which everyone's sick of me saying this, but I used to knit. I used to be a knitter, and you knit something with a piece of yarn, you knit a jumper or whatever, and it's almost like that's your novel. And then you rip all of that again, undo all of the stitching, and use the same yarn to knit a cardigan, which is very similar to the jumper, but it's not the jumper, it's now a cardigan. And that's the screenplay. So
do you think that's where your engineering process is, where you're someone who, looks at characters, understands who the people are that you're sort of observing in the world that you're constructing, but that engineering bit takes over, and it's like, I see where the pieces need to go.
I do, and I don't. It's funny because I don't know if, like, you only know how your own brain works. You don't really know how other people's brains work. But I find now I'm getting a lot of say just work. People asking me to kind of just help out with maybe scripts that just need a little organizing, or just they just need a bit of a whipping into shape sort of thing. Like, the script's all great, it's just whatever. And I find that almost like, sometimes I think, God, I'm not saying I'm like your man who's in that movie, who's like the super duper maths brain, and he can see every, like, the world in sort of maths. But I do have a very practical engineering side to my head. I definitely do. And I do see the structure. That's, I think, why I like screenwriting so much, because there has to be a structure. There is a structure. It works better if there's a good, strong skeleton of a story structure. Whereas novel writing is much more flighty, which is the wrong word to use again. But it's much more malleable. Screenwriting, you just... for an audience to really enjoy it, whether they realize it or not, there needs to be some structure, like, hidden away that no one's aware of, but it's there. And I'm very comfortable in that space, absolutely. So maybe I think you're right. Like, that's just how my brain works, because it was like deconstructing the novel, realizing very clearly what the essence of the story was and what the important bit was, and then building a screenplay around that, with help and with direction and with, even like with T.G. Carr and with the script editors and with the producers. And then after we had a script, then Ruan, the director, comes on, and then he's got opinions as well. And it's such a collaborative process, so different to novel writing, but I loved that aspect of it too. I like working as a team. I like people who care about my work enough to have an opinion. I like getting their opinions. I like people with opinions, and I'm well able to kind of take an opinion, take a note or not take a note, which is also probably going back to our very first conversation about being slightly older in this game. You've more confidence in your own decision making as well. So I think again it's a good thing to have that, just a bit of life experience, because you get all these notes, but sometimes you need to know which notes are the right notes and which ones to take and which ones not to take. And I think again that's definitely helpful. It's helpful to be older when you're doing that.
And in terms then of, like, you've come to the end of I suppose this project now, it's about to see the light of day. It's about to get its cinema release. At this stage now, as we're chatting, you have watched it with audiences. You have seen it alongside. Was there anything, watching it now as the writer, come to fruition up till now that was a surprise, or maybe is like slightly different than you thought?
I don't know. It's funny. I suppose, what's bizarre is, like, I wrote this book 2015. So I was dreaming up these characters in 2013. We're going back that far. And I, like, a very clear idea in my head what they all look like, because you have to, like, you always imagine, like, sometimes I literally cut out pictures of people off and put them on, like, and move them around the desk so I can see how the actual, what they'll look like and how they'll interact, like, but I had very clear picture in my head. And then of course a film is cast and they physically don't look like the people that you were thinking of. And that's disconcerting. The process of it is disconcerting. But what I have found, though, is in the cinema, watching them, I'm going, oh my God, there's Coleman. Look at him. Like, he's amazing. He looks exactly like Coleman should look, poor Galanchi. And it's not exactly what you had in your head, but it's just, like, it's just great. Like, and I mean, maybe, sometimes maybe that it doesn't feel so good. Maybe you're going, oh, I wish, she was taller or something, and she's just different. But actually the whole, it's just such a gift. It's such a joy for somebody else to want to come and make, bring your story to life. So I think you just have to go with it and go, wow, I hadn't thought of it like that, but that's the way they thought about it. And it's great. It's beautiful, like, so.
Yeah. Well, not even appearance, but more vibes. Do you know, like if you're writing a character and they're in your head, if you're listening to their voice, like it's more their energy of the thing that they're bringing, like like someone is soft or warm, or they're really earnest, or they're kind of curt, but it's because they're withholding. I think that would be the thing that would be very hard to let go of.
Yeah, I guess, and I mean, when you're writing characters, like, always, but maybe especially with books, I think you're always kind of thinking subconsciously about people or people you've met, and you're bringing little bits of different people into characters. I mean, that's inevitable.
And do they ever recognize themselves?
I couldn't answer that question, but when you see it on screen, the actor and the director, there's bits of them they've superimposed on this character, so they're bringing them in. So of course it's going to be different, and maybe but look, I've never looked at any of them and gone, oh, I wish they were something else. It's slightly different, and it's fabulous. It's it'd be very sour grapesy to be looking at things and going, that wasn't exactly what I envisaged 13 years ago or whatever. It is what it is, and I'm so proud of it. I think it's
gorgeous, and like it's more like as an observer watching it, but that's like it's just interesting because something has been in your mind in a specific way for so long, and you've spent so much time with it.
100%. And even it's interesting because, say for example, when the play, which was called Glanafuka, when we had that reading, we had this amazing actress who played the role of Peggy, Fiona Lucia Magari, and she was phenomenal. And of course, it was the first time I'd ever heard somebody speak Peggy's words out loud. Yeah. So for the longest time, when I was picturing Peggy in my head, and when I was writing the screenplay, I was picturing that actress because she just was. She's incredible. She's an incredible actress and musician, and she was phenomenal. And then Eleanor O'Brien, who plays Peggy in the movie, is so very different from her. Physically so very different. She's like, her tone is so different, her approach is so different, and yet she's amazing as well. So it's almost like there's these three Peggys living in, you know, some weird universe, like concurrently.
Quantum physics.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
so it's in no way is one sort of better than the other. They were just different, but it is an incredible kind of experience. And I think, look, it's like life. I think you can look at anything and begrudgingly or glass half empty, or like, you know, why not just go, wow, it's different. And actually, do you know what? Brilliant. It's just, it's great. The whole thing is fantastic. So I think you just have to have an open mind for all of these things. There's no point in, I think I've found, you know, very much so, there's no point in screenwriting or writing for TV or film if you're going to be like nitpicking every little thing and be very sensitive and precious about stuff, because it is a team sport. 100%. Yeah. It's not novel writing. It's like, if you feel like that about stuff and that's your personality, then that's fine, absolutely, but you should be writing novels. You know, you're never going to enjoy the process of screenwriting. So I just think it's a wonderful thing, as we said earlier on, to have all these people who actually care so much about their jobs and love what they do, want to spend time on your words.
Would you ever be tempted to take on, say, maybe a showrunner role or anything like that? Would that ever, you know, like where you're kind of calling more of those kind of creative shots? Yeah,
absolutely. It's something actually I've like thought about a lot, and I actually was very lucky and got to go to the Media Exchange week in LA in 2024. Thanks to Screen Ireland, and that's drama showrunner exchange. And honestly, that week, I mean, I know how expensive it is, so it was I was so lucky and grateful to get the week sponsored by Screen Ireland. But I mean, if, oh my God, you could beg, borrow and steal, I would say go on that week. It was such a great week. I learned so much. I spoke to so many incredible showrunners, and I had already, like, I'd done another course that the Writers Guild had run with Peter McKenna, which was about writers as executive producers, which was basically the same thing. It was about how you don't just turn over a script, you're actually involved in the process of producing TV. But the same applies a little bit to film, but you're kind of more so to the TV. And like, again, it was so funny because a lot of the stuff that we were talking about, and it's people management, it's project management, it's budgets, it's all the things I used to do when I was an engineer. Yeah. It's basically the same, except in a different industry. So I think it's kind of interesting when you hear people talking about writers who, and I'm sure, like, everybody's different. I've no doubt there's writers who have no interest in being showrunners, or maybe who do have an interest in being showrunners but are terrible showrunners. No doubt at all. But my own particular skill set is such that I actually think I wouldn't be the worst showrunner in the world.
But if you're that logistical, that's such a natural progression.
Yeah, I mean, it's very. But show running is not like a fixed thing either, and certainly here in Ireland, anything that's kind of like a showrunner position is very different to what it would be in the States or even in the UK. But certainly, like, there's a project now that that's been optioned that I would hope there's going to be a writer's room for, and I would absolutely want to be the lead writer in that room. Like, it's my project, I created it, but I would also want to be more involved. I definitely want to be involved in casting. I definitely want to be involved in the production design. I'm not an accountant and I don't really like doing budgets and stuff. So, I mean, I don't see why there's no reason why I couldn't be bringing my particular skill set to certain aspects of a showrunner role, whereas not being like ticking every box that maybe you might have to tick if you were a showrunner in the States. Yeah. So it's very much, I think, suck it and see, and you do whatever is required for a particular job. But I hope the people who have worked with me already would say, and like, I feel myself that I have more to bring to projects than, say, just the script. And like, certainly I loved the little bit. I wasn't hugely involved in different things in Báite, but the little things I was involved in, I loved being involved in. But at the end of the day, my favourite thing to do is write. Yeah. And if I had to choose what part of the process I'd want to be involved in, that's what I want to be doing. If it comes, like if there's certain shows that, you know, mean I can add more to, bring more to the table, amazing, I want to do that too. But at the end of the day, if, you know, if the whole world was falling apart, I would just want to have my laptop or a pen and paper and write the next play. That's what I want to do.
Well, we can't wait to watch it. Thank you so much for chatting with us,
Thank
and
you.
congratulations.
Thank you so much.